Good morning, Molly, and very good evening, James.
Good evening, Ruchira.
And it's very nice to have you, Molly, on the show. Thank you so much for making time and agreeing to be with us and hosting this show on psychosynthesis. We are really grateful.
I'm delighted. I'm just so delighted to be with both of you.
Thank you. So, Molly, I am sitting in Seattle. James is sitting in Kampala, Uganda. Where are you logging in from?
I'm in Mount Shasta, California, which is the far end of California, the north end. And it's Mount Shasta is this 14,000 foot volcano,
Wow.
which is dormant, but not extinct. It could decide to go off again. So it's a beautiful, beautiful place to live.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Molly. And well, today we are here to talk about psychosynthesis coaching. And before we do that, I would like to talk a little about your work that is already present and help us give a little bit of context to what psychosynthesis is before we move further into the coaching bit. And it'll be nice for us to know because Asa Jolie always believed in context. So given this is the first time a lot of people are probably hearing about psychosynthesis per se, it's going to be amazing if we focus a little bit of our time today in today's conversation around what that is. But before that, I did want to talk to all the folks who have joined us today, that Molly is an international author of 7 books. Her most popular book happened to be Coming Back to Life, which is the work that reconnects with Joan Macy. And two of Molly's psychosynthesis books are Growing Whole and Unfolding Self. Some beautiful books written out there. And Molly is in the middle of the 8th book right now, Molly? I know you're...
Yeah, I'm working on a revision for Coming Back to Life. Yep.
Yeah. And I hope at future points in time, we will be able to talk about work that reconnects because we have to bring that to Africa as well, don't we?
I want to, yes.
Yes. So at another point, we'll talk about that. But for today, Molly, thank you again for coming, and over to you. Please talk to us about Asa Jolie. Talk to us about how you met him and how the journey started for you.
Great. Yeah. Well, I was interested in psychology, but I was also interested in Eastern. At that time, we were just calling them Eastern religions. Essentially, it's Buddhism, and I wanted a psychology that it included the spiritual realm. And at that time, most psychologies were very kind of like adjusting people to the society so they'd be successful. And adjusting people to what I now believe is a dysfunctional society is not a great idea. Anyway, so when I found psychosynthesis, I went to a workshop that was called Ecology of Positive Development or something like that. That wasn't quite right, but anyway, something like that. And found out about psychosynthesis, found out about Asa Jolie, bought his book, which was called Psychosynthesis, the Manual of something or another, his original book, which is still out there and still available. And I was just delighted. Here was a psychology that didn't cut you off, here or right about here, but included the fact that there was a spiritual dimension. Didn't define it, didn't try and say it's this or that or the other thing. It wasn't a set of beliefs, but said, hey, there's this whole dimension of life that how can you have a complete psychology if you don't talk about people's spiritual experiences? So it brought together my interest in spiritual pursuits as well as psychological pursuits. So started studying with a couple of people that were doing it in California, and then decided that I had to go see Assagioli. I was about 30, and my husband a few years older than me. So, and I said, you know, here's this great man. I want to go study with this great man, because he was 84 at the time. So he was getting on in years and didn't know how much longer he would be around. So we were not financially well off at that time. We were struggling financially, but my parents loaned us the money to get over there, and we went over and studied with him in 1973. And I was 31 years old. So and I was looking for a picture I have of me and Assagioli, and I look about 16. So anyway, Assagioli had studied with Freud, and he was a contemporary of Jung, Carl Jung, although he was a bit younger than Carl Jung. And he liked what Jung had done, but he still felt like he hadn't taken it far enough. It felt like he says somewhere in his writings, and I think he said it to us in person, that Freud explored the basement and the main floor, but he wanted to explore the upper levels of the house and even in the attic. So that was his image for what he wanted to do, which he called height psychology, as not as opposed to depth psychology, but he saw it as an expansion. He didn't say, oh, well, let's not pay attention to the basement, let's just go up in the attic. He wanted to do all of it. So he started talking about personal psychosynthesis, which was more the basement and the ground floor, and spiritual psychosynthesis, or transpersonal psychosynthesis, which was the upper levels. And he felt like, in a way, you do both at once, but if you haven't done the personal psychosynthesis, you need to, be a fairly developed person psychologically before you can go into the upper realms, because we all know what happens when people who are psychologically immature start doing a lot of spiritual work. They can get really distorted, and using spiritual pursuits as an escape rather than as an expansion. So we went and studied with him in 1973. It was fantastic. We spent 5 weeks in Italy, leaving our small children with my parents and their other grandparents, Jim's parents too. So it was really a extremely formative time of my life, and I learned to meditate from Assagioli. He taught a form of meditation called he called it creative meditation, and it really worked for me, because I'd been trying to meditate, and I thought you were just supposed to sit down and clear your mind, and that was what you're supposed to do. And of course I couldn't. Since then, I've understood that no, you don't clear your mind, you watch your mind, but you don't clear it. And maybe it clears after a while, but that, I thought it was, so he gave me something to do with my mind in his form of meditation. And it was very, very helpful. I could talk about that, but I'm not sure that that's what we want to spend time on. So questions?
So Molly, it's interesting. You spoke about personal psychosynthesis, and that caught my attention. And I was like, we want to know what personal psychosynthesis is. But before we get there, it would be very helpful if you can unpack psychosynthesis for us, because in itself, it's a very loaded word. What does it mean, right? So psychosynthesis, is, we understand it as the psychology of will. We understand it as a psychology of hope. We understand it as the psychology of soul and wisdom. But what does all of that anyway mean? So we do know analytical psychology from Freud and Jung. We know behaviorism from Pavlov. We know Carl Rogers and Maslow's theories, right? How does all of this build up, and where does it find place in psychosynthesis?
Well, let me see. I had something I was going to say, and now it's fled my mind. Well, I know what I want to do. Psychosynthesis. Psychoanalysis is what Freud did. And it was very mental. It was very, you analyze and you figure out what's going on with a person, and you maybe make some adjustments or try and heal whatever is causing problems. Psychosynthesis is, in a way, almost the opposite. It's not the opposite, but it's at the other end of the continuum. It's integration. It's bringing all the parts of a person together in an integrated whole. It's very holistic. And that's why he called it psychosynthesis. Apparently, Freud may have even used that word at some point, but he didn't develop it. And so Assagioli said, I want to develop. How do you make a person whole and together? So in personal psychosynthesis, we work a lot with the parts. We call them subpersonalities, ways that a person develops a behavior pattern, a belief system, a emotional collection of emotions in response to what happens. So if you have a very, say, a domineering parent, you might develop a subpersonality that's very submissive. But that isn't who you really are. You have all kinds of different parts of yourself that can be developed. But if you just identify with one subpersonality, then you're limited. So one of the things we do in psychosynthesis, we never get rid of anything. We're going to keep that subpersonality. We can't anyway. We can pretend to, but it doesn't work. It just goes underground and affects us in unconscious ways. So we work with that subpersonality and find out, what does it want? What does it need? What does it have to offer? And we find a way to integrate that into the whole personality as a contributing member rather than a difficult, a problem. It's really amazing, because every time you work with a subpersonality, you find out it has something to offer, some richness, some wisdom, some skill that can be of service, but it doesn't work as long as you're just identified with that one part. So it really helps people bring their whole self forward, all their capacities, and creative especially, and not just be limited to their conditioning or what they were taught as small children. Does that kind of...
You mentioned a little while ago, Molly, you said something about becoming psychologically mature. Is this the same thing, or that's something
Yes.
different?
Yeah, it's a good way of saying it. Self-awareness is so important in psychosynthesis. I think it's important in life, but a lot of people are not particularly self-aware. They react to things, but they don't really know why they're reacting the way they are. They just, well, I'm mad. Well, what's going on with that anger? What's stimulating that anger? Where's that coming from? So the self-awareness is huge in psychosynthesis. And it's such a powerful tool because then you're not at the mercy of your reactions in the moment. You have a way of, we call it disidentifying, saying, yeah, this is me. This is part of me, but I'm more than this. Yeah, I'm angry right now, but I'm more than my anger. And it really is a powerful way of becoming psychologically mature. And the other aspect, which you mentioned, is will. So we say that the self in psychosynthesis, we talk about the self with a small s and a capital S.
Mhm.
And it's a center of self-awareness and will. So I'm aware of myself. And of course, right in this moment, I'm not 100% aware of myself. I'm sure there's things happening that I'm not aware of, reactions I'm having or nervousness or whatever. But as much as I am aware, then I can choose with will how I'm going to respond and how I'm going to react. I'm not just driven by my emotions in the moment. Although I pay attention to them, I don't repress them. It's really important to make that distinction.
So that's another kind of awareness, becoming aware. We're not just anger is an emotion at the end of the day, right? So it's not just being identified with what's happening at hand, but also having a sense of taking two steps back. You mentioned disidentification, a very important concept as well in psychosynthesis, to be able to say that, hey, this is happening, but what else is happening around this? What else is happening around me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll invite James. We have Molly, we have very recently graduated the first batch of psychosynthesis coaches in Uganda. And it's the very first time that in the continent of Africa that, we've taken psychosynthesis. So it's really, really proud. It's really a happy moment for us. And Ben has been a previous tutor for both James and me. And at this stage, both of us, when we started psychosynthesis, we had concept of what coaching is, right? But it layered a whole lot for me. But I'd like to invite James to talk about his experience of what psychosynthesis coaching. You mentioned tool, Molly. So I'm going to go to coaching more immediately and directly, and invite maybe James to talk about his experience of what psychosynthesis coaching has been for him.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ruchira. Molly, very happy to have you on this call. And yes, I graduated end of last year, and I've been in going through psychosynthesis coaching with Ruchira for the last 1 year, 1.5 years. And there's been a big transformation in my life because, as she said, I was already a coach. I had been trained. I'm a professional certified coach with the International Coaching Federation. I had already been coaching, but I want to mention that psychosynthesis coaching has put something, like you said, expanded. It has expanded my understanding of how to actually go about with the coaching, because it has helped me now to understand the psychology of the person that is in front of me, of the client. And everything that I do now is from a psychological mindedness. So I look at a person as a whole and not just one specific aspect or just following a particular process only, but looking at the person as a whole. So this has been quite fascinating for me, and it has been quite an exciting journey. And this has really been very fulfilling, even to me as a person, I've now begun to understand myself more, because before then, I had not even, for example, reflected on that child James Onyoin, myself as a child. And when we started going through the exercises, I started seeing that curious young child in me at a much earlier age coming up. And these are things that I've influenced the way I look at things. So now that I'm with you on this call, there has been a lot of reference to the egg. I know they told us a few things about it. I think it would be nice for you to talk to the audience about this egg that we heard a lot about in psychosynthesis classes.
Yeah. It's called the egg because it's kind of egg-shaped. It's also called the oval diagram because the oval is in the middle. It's a really useful model, and it's just a model, it's just not like saying we are all eggs. No, but it's a useful way of thinking and looking at human consciousness. Really, it's about consciousness. So in the egg diagram, you imagine that there's 3 levels of consciousness, and they're drawn with dotted lines. Everything's done with a dotted line because everything's going back and forth and mixing up. It's not like there's a boundary there. So even the egg is a dotted line. And then there's 3 levels. The lower unconscious is the bottom part, the middle unconscious, and the higher unconscious. So the idea is that we have all those levels of the unconscious in us. And in the middle of that is a smaller circle that's the field of awareness. So right now, I'm aware of Ruchira and James and my screen in front of me and my water bottle, and that's my field of awareness. But it's in the middle of the middle unconscious. So I could take a moment and say, what did I do earlier? I took a shower this morning. And I can bring that in immediately, but I'm not thinking about it until I do. So the middle unconscious is just all the stuff that is readily available to us, if we just think a little bit about it. Then the lower unconscious has sort of 2 parts or 2 aspects. One is our biological functioning. We cannot possibly be thinking about our heartbeat every moment. We can't be thinking even about our breathing. We can absolutely say, I want to pay attention to my breathing, and then it comes up. But our biological functioning is largely in the lower unconscious. But then the other aspect of the lower unconscious is stuff that we have actively repressed, traumas that have affected us, things we don't want to think about anymore, and we repress those feelings. And that can be dangerous because they can affect our behavior in ways that, I'm suddenly terrified of somebody I see on the street. Why? Because there's some kind of unconscious association that I've repressed. So middle unconscious, lower unconscious, middle unconscious. Freud did a lot of work with the lower unconscious, incidentally. I have a lot to say about Freud, but I'm not going to go into that. Then the higher unconscious is our potentials for love, for creativity, for joy, for even compassion, all that kind of thing. We call them transpersonal qualities. And they are available to everyone, but they're largely unconscious, and we need to have them evoked and brought forth. And a lot of what we do in psychosynthesis through the imagination mostly and intuition is access that higher unconscious and bring it into our lives, for more consciousness, but also for beauty and just being a happier person. So and then we have at the top of the oval, here this oval, this is inside, and at the top we have what we call the higher self, or what Assagioli called the higher self. I don't call it higher self anymore. I just call it self with a capital S, but I'll tell you why in a moment. But anyway, he called it the higher self. That's why he called it height psychology. And the higher self is like our soul. It's like our spiritual self. And it is up there like a sun or a star. And then we have in the middle, the very middle, the personal self, which is with a small s, or the I. We also call it the I with a capital I. It's like when I say I, that's what I'm referencing, is that little place. But it's connected to the higher self. And we can, from the I, we can access the higher self. We can ask for, when we meditate, we often do this, or we ask for guidance, or I'm journaling and I write to my dear higher self, what should I do about this situation? And so often some kind of response comes. And to trust that, not trust it blindly, because I could get a message that I need to go out and, I could hear a voice that would tell me something destructive. So I have to have some discrimination, but you can tell, because the higher self will always love and beauty, and it's not going to tell me to go out and kill somebody. That's just not. So, so there's the egg diagram. Oh, and I forgot to say, outside the oval is what we call the collective unconscious. So we, three of us, share the collective unconscious. That it's kind of the unconsciousness of humanity, and it has those three levels too. So, for example, right now, I am really, really being affected by what's happening in Gaza and the 23,000 people been killed so far. I mean, it's just, so that's part of my maybe lower or middle unconscious. I'm not quite sure what, but I'm also seeing a whole lot of people in the world acting to try and stop it. And to me, that's the higher unconscious. That's a collective higher unconscious that says, I love, we want to be together. We want to be united. We don't want to be killing one another. And so the collective unconscious has all those three dimensions as well.
It's very nice you speak about the collective unconscious, Molly, because I think we live in times that it's not just about self-awareness. I think we are living in troubled times today, where we want to begin to paying attention to what's happening outside of ourselves as well, which means not just in our homes, not just, we need to expand it to our communities and from communities to countries and from countries to the entire ecosystem that we live in. I know coming back to life speaks of all of that, but I think in so many ways, psychosynthesis paves the path for moving towards, I think, we use a mindset of sustainability, but I think it's a lot more than that. I think psychosynthesis paves the path for connecting to the planet, to the ecosystem, to the world that we live in through the collective unconscious. There are so many prayers, there are so many institutions, there are so many, there's just so much happening to pray for both the wars that are going on in our world at this point of time. So yeah, I think there is a collective unconscious that today is highly active, it's activated, and it's the coming together. It's like a brewing, it's like something brewing in the cosmos.
Yep. And honestly, I think we'd be even worse off if we didn't have that, because it would be nothing to keep all the trauma and, historical trauma that has gone on in the world that is still playing out in our current life. But we haven't had nuclear war. I mean, for example, and what's kept that from happening? You have to, and there's universal prayers for peace going on all the time. People coming together and meditating or praying for peace. I really think it affects things because we are all interconnected, psychically as well as physically.
Yeah.
I wanted to say one other thing that you made me think of. We consider the higher self, or the capital S self, as being both individual and universal. So my higher self and your higher self are one and the same. It's like, maybe it would be like a diamond that would have all these different surfaces that would be reflecting. And I get, one diamond beam comes to me and another one comes to you. But it's kind of a paradoxical understanding that how could be something both universal and individual at the same time. But here we are.
Yeah.
Very different people from very different parts of the world, and yet we're also together and in union with one another.
That's very true, Molly. And thank you so much for saying that. It makes my heart very, very warm.
Yeah, really, really, really good. Maybe just one more question. You mentioned that when there's a subpersonality, you don't need to dismiss it or to do away with it, but to recognize that I have this particular subpersonality, and then you need to work with it and find out what does it want, how can it, how can you make the best use of it and so forth. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because that's quite fascinating to me.
Yeah, and it totally could be used in coaching, because you don't have to go into ancient history as to how it came about. All you have to do is have a dialogue. We use imagination so much in psychosynthesis, and Assagioli saw imagination as a distinct function. It wasn't just part of thinking. We have the thinking mind, but we also have imagination and intuition. So we use imagination a lot. And so if I was working with a subpersonality with someone, either my own or somebody else's, there's 3 questions that I tend to ask. One is, what does it want? And it might be what it doesn't want too. I mean, it could be both what it wants or what it doesn't want. And that could be very kind of like, well, I want to be left alone, or I want something sweet to eat, or, it could be fairly reactive and kind of, But then the next question is, what do you really need? And sometimes some personality doesn't know what it really needs, but you can explore it and work with it and find out, what does it really need? It's so often love, acceptance, to be seen, stuff like that. No matter what it is, it's so often that it just needs to be embraced, held, loved, given some space. And then the third question, what does it have to offer? And every single part of ourselves, even the most obnoxious parts of ourselves, have something to offer. And it might even be in that obnoxiousness. It's a stubborn thing of saying, no, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep. And so then we find a way for that subpersonality to contribute what it has in a more effective way. So, and working with someone and their subpersonality, it almost always ends up in tears, because it's like this part of ourselves that has been struggling all these years and just wants to be accepted and loved and allowed to give what it can give. It's really quite remarkable.
Yeah.
Is that what you were trying to speak to?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for that.
And I just wanted to bring in, Molly, I think what you're saying, it's been my personal experience as well, that working with subpersonalities is a very profound thing to do, even in a coaching session. We have so many leaders who come in and they speak of their struggles. They speak of decisions that they have to make. They speak of new things that they want to do. They speak of roadblocks that they are facing, oppositions that they are facing, and how they're coming into it, and they're constantly looking for ways around. And so often, it's almost as if that these struggles and not able to get over a lot of these hurdles in the same way that they have done in the past comes from a place of subpersonality, a tough subpersonality. A lot of the times it's a tough subpersonality. Sometimes it's the underdog that people have arrived. There are leaders, there are people who have arrived in life, but they're still operating from the subpersonality maybe of an underdog. Subpersonality. I have met senior leaders who operate from the subpersonality of a giver. I am giving, giving, giving. And then there is exertion, there's burnout, and they have no idea what that is.
Yep.
Right. And working with those spots, right? And it's also true. A lot of the leaders we speak to and we ask them, what does this part need? And they are clueless. Sometimes it takes one session, sometimes it spills into the second session, third session, but once they discover, it just is a whole lot of things that comes out, and it also has the potential of leading to, I always believe, I think it's true too, that subpersonalities come in pair. So you're not always working with
That's
one.
right.
Anytime you discover one, there's the other one that is somewhere in the vicinity hiding. So
And usually in conflict.
yes,
Often in conflict. Yeah. So you could have a rebellious subpersonality, and then somewhere else is a domineering subpersonality is trying to put down that rebel. So, and then the rebel is rebelling against the domination. It's very, very common. Yeah.
So so James has led us into a beautiful place about what subpersonality is, which is a very big piece in how psychosynthesis coaching is done. So I want to bring that back to you, Molly. So how do psychosynthesis coaches, those who are planning to, or those who want to become psychosynthesis coaches, what is it that you want to say to them? What is it that you have to say to them? And mostly, I think I want you to talk to, how do they go about building themselves in this field?
Mm-hmm. Well, James already spoke to some of the ways that psychosynthesis expanded his understanding of coaching. And I honestly haven't been trained as a coach because it's come about since, you know, I've been doing psychosynthesis for what, 50 years or something. So coming, as a matter of fact, oh my God, I studied with Asa Jolie 50 years ago. I didn't put that together until just now. Wow. Anyway, so coaching came into existence as a way of working with people after that time. But I understand that a lot of coaching training is about setting goals and helping the person work towards that goal. And I have a little problem with that because where do you get the goal? You tend to get it from your thinking mind, and the culture that you live in. It's not necessarily taking you beyond your own conditioning or your own culture. So I could set a goal that I want to make $1 million, but that comes out of a culture that is focused on money and profit, which is not a healthy thing. It's destroying the planet. So I see psychosynthesis coaching as helping people get in touch with a much deeper, and I won't even call it a goal, I'll call it a calling. Yeah. Helping people get in touch. What are you on earth here for? And it's not like somebody sent you and said, here's your assignment, but in fact, it evolves out of your life circumstances and and whatever you were born with, because I think we are born with certain talents and so forth, genetically. But here I am. How can I be of greatest service to the world? And that's my calling. And I would say that would be, for me, the main purpose of psychosynthesis coaching is helping people find that calling, and then, you know, look at the practical ways of taking that calling forward. I mean, there are practical limitations. You need some money, you need or whatever, but it's based on that calling, which comes from the higher self or the self. That's what I believe.
And I'm so glad you said that, Molly. I'm so very glad that you said that. And I think it's what makes this term soul guide, and you introduced this in your book, Unfolding Self. It makes the term soul guide so much more meaningful in that sense. And at Coach Koeji, the psychosynthesis coaching approach that we've taken is really based on your teachings, your guidance on what we can do as soul guides. And I think a vast majority of our training, at least the psychosynthesis training we are doing at Coach Koeji, it is dedicated to generating higher will, expanding consciousness, and just really living life from a soul guide perspective, whether we call ourselves coaches or we choose to use any other term. I think at the end of the day, it's very fulfilling. I think James used the term fulfilling, that to be able to help another person, help another soul, and the stars being connected. I think I'll borrow that from what you said. It's really the essence, right? You have one, I have one, James has one, and every person on this planet has one. So every time the higher self of two individuals connect, it's a place of potentiality. It's a place of just whole lot of unarticulated, unexpressed, and sometimes even unburdened love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you talk about a higher self of two people connecting, or discovering each other or whatever and honestly, I think good marriages that last are often based on that, there is a connection. Those two, the higher selves of both people are in some way like in cahoots. And that I know that for me, I could not have done, and I don't believe I would be the person I am today if I hadn't been married to my life partner for 62 years. Anyway, that I just know it. I know it in my deepest heart that his support and belief and challenges too are part of my life path. And now that doesn't work for everybody, or maybe sometimes you have a partner and it doesn't last, but you get something from it while it does. And then, I'm not saying you have to be married your whole life like I've been, but I see that as very much. And could I say something more about, or do we have time?
Oh, yeah,
About,
yeah.
Some people have felt like having the higher self be a higher self is problematic in that it's part of the kind of hierarchical concept that there's higher and lower, and higher is better and lower is worse, and that kind of thing. There's a little bit what's the word I want, dualistic. And so some people have said the quote higher self, or the self with a capital S, is throughout the egg diagram. That it's not just up there, it's down there, it's everywhere. And sometimes people have very deep experiences of connecting to soul or self in the midst of a really horrible situation. So it's not just everything's all sweetness and light. Self is present for us always in the midst of our darkest times. And we may not be aware of it, we may not sense it, but it's there. So we always have that source within us to connect. And I think it's Gaia. I think it's Earth. I think it's the higher self is the ecological self, is the self of Gaia. And we're all connected to that in one way or another.
That's so beautiful what you said, Molly, and I so totally believe that. So for all our audiences who are listening over here, Gaia is a theory. If you've not explored it before, I invite you to check out the Gaia theory, check out the systems thinking theory. There is a Gaia TV network now. It's very accessible, and they have some beautiful stuff there. And my invitation to everybody over here who is looking to work with sustainability, who is wanting to build and develop an understanding around ecology and ecological frameworks and how to bring it into your work practice, your role maybe needs it, and all those kind of things. I think psychosynthesis and Gaia and all these theories that are there today present a very, very sound, not just a framework, but also a practical way of making progress in these areas. So that would be my invitation. And yes, self exists everywhere, and I'm one of those people who experiences self most clearly when there is crisis. And Molly, somehow I feel that a whole lot of people out there experience self in crisis. I don't know what you have to say about it, but that's totally my experience, my personal experience, which also lends me to think and believe that that once we have had an experience of that clear self, it also means that we have the innate agency to do something about that crisis. That's just fundamentally born in us. I think in so many words, we call it resilience. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's more than resilience. I don't know if there is a term for it. I think the same self gives us the agency to hope. It's the same agency that allows us wisdom of self and the sense that we are more than our mind, body, and feelings.
We are. Yep.
All right. I think we really, really have been at this for a while. James, is there anything else that you would like to add or ask or anything at this point?
Yeah, thank you. I think it has been a great privilege speaking to the two of you, especially Molly. Thank you very much for the great work you are doing. And I look forward to more conversations with you. The people in Africa are really thirsty for this kind of enlightenment. And I'll really ask you when we call on you next time, please be available so that we can have this conversation with a lot of folks here in Africa. Thank you.
I want to add something to that, James, because I'm really, really curious of what traditional African traditions resonate. In other words, us as Julie thought us as psychosynthesis with a small p because he thought it was everywhere, it was just way humans are. It's just what we do. If we're allowed to and given, not too suppressed or repressed. So I'll just bet that there's a lot of resonance in African traditions with psychosynthesis, using different language, using different ways of, stories and so forth. So
Yes.
I look forward to exploring that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I'm sure there will be opportunities to do that. And there's a lot of spirituality as well in Africa. And I'm sure most of these things will connect to that higher self that we're talking about. And like you said, the big S is really universal. Doesn't matter whether you're in Africa, in Asia, in Americas. The big S is about all of us.
The big S, I like it.
Yeah. All right,
Yes.
fantastic, fantastic. And so today we have spoken about spirituality as a practice. We have spoken about building foundations before the right kind of foundation, psychological maturity before we embark on those kind of paths. We've spoken about expanding consciousness. We have spoken about will. We have spoken about Assagioli's egg diagram, the smallest, the biggest. We have spoken about potential. How and where do we find potential? Potential can both be at the top of the egg. It can also be at the bottom of the egg, and how in a coaching conversations these can be explored. And I think most essentially we have spoken about how to address the call of self through coaching conversations, through psychosynthesis coaching conversations. So it's my invitation for all those who are called to not necessarily be a coach, but to be a soul guide in their own lives for themselves and for those around them, to take this up as something, in fact, if anything else, as a spiritual practice, not necessarily as a commercial or a, out there practice. Of course, there is a way of making it commercial and being coaches, but nonetheless, it's so much more about the soul and the soul guide approach that psychosynthesis means to me, to Coach Koeji. And I'm very delighted that Molly, who is actually not just about psychosynthesis, but creating the pathways of how to progress and proceed and bring this to application, that Molly, who is the founder of that, who's the original author of that, is here with us today. So Molly, we owe a lot to you. Thank you so very much for being with us here today and making time again and sharing your wisdom, your life journey and story with us. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Ruchira.